Hi everyone, well I've just finished my review of the Sigma 50mm f1.4 lens, which you can also see on my YouTube channel, but here's a video to compare it with Canon's 50mm f1.4 lens and 50mm f1.8 lens. I'm not going to cover the f1.2 lens because it costs £1,000. I'm going to go through things quite quickly, so just pause the video if you need to. First, let's look at the build quality. The first thing you'll see is the huge difference in size. The Sigma lens is huge and heavy and built like a German tank. The Canon 1.8 is tiny and cheap and plasticky and slightly nasty in comparison, while the Canon 1.4 is a happy medium between the two, although still fairly compact, especially compared to the Sigma. The difference in build quality is somewhat reflected in a difference in price, the f1.8 being cheapest by far and the Sigma being slightly more expensive than a Canon f1.4. The autofocus on Canon's 50mm 1.8 is quick but very noisy, as you can hear here. Full-time manual focusing is not available and the focus ring is very loose and slightly fiddly to use. The Sigma 1.4 and Canon 1.4 are much better, both having ultrasonic autofocus motors which are faster and very quiet. They also have much nicer and smoother focus rings which you can turn at any time. I slightly prefer the focus ring on the Sigma lens though. It's slightly smoother and the focus path on a Canon 1.4 lens is really long, which is a pain when you're video making. But one problem with the Sigma lens is that a lot of people are reporting autofocus inaccuracies. Take a look at my review of the lens for a little more information. All three lenses can give you a really nice out-of-focus background. The f1.4 lenses even more so, as they have a 66% wider aperture, letting in 66% more light and giving a much narrower depth of field. So the Canon 1.8 loses out a little here. In my opinion, if you look at the out-of-focus backgrounds, the Sigma lens has the best quality bokeh, looking really nice and smooth. The Canon lenses struggle a tiny bit here, with slightly busier backgrounds and stronger highlights. The nicer quality bokeh on the Sigma lens is a big deal to a lot of photographers. So let's look at image quality. First of all, wide open at f1.4. I think that the Canon lens is actually very slightly sharper, but it's blighted by lower contrast, heavy purple fringing and ghosting. I much prefer the picture quality of the Sigma lens. The corners are clearly a little better on the Sigma lens too, and they're brighter with less vignetting. Now let's top down to f1.8 so that we can introduce the Canon 1.8 lens. In the centre, the Canon 1.4 looks the sharpest to me, but it has more purple fringing than the Sigma 1.4. The Canon 1.8 is reasonably sharp, but the colours and contrast are a little weak, and the purple fringing is there too. If we look at the corners, we can see that the Canon lenses are weakest, and again, the Sigma lens has the edge. Let's top down to f2.8. They're all nice and sharp here, but I think that the Canon 1.4 has the edge over the Sigma lens. The Canon 1.8 lags behind very slightly in terms of sharpness, and I still don't like the lack of contrast. If we move over to the corners, we can see that the Canon 1.8 is still lagging behind. To me, it looks like the Sigma lens is sharpest, but look in the windows and you will see that it has a little more chromatic aberration than the Canon 1.4. Let's wrap things up now by looking at f5.6. All three lenses are now performing excellently in the centre. So let's look in the corners. They still look great, but once again I think the Canon 1.8 is very slightly weaker. The Sigma comes in second place. It's nice and sharp, but there's still a little chromatic aberration. The Canon 1.4 seems to be the sharpest. But feel free to make up your own minds, all three lenses really are great. Resistance to vignetting is another strong point of the Sigma lens. As you can see, the two Canon lenses struggle a little more than the Sigma lens with its huge front element. All these pictures I took on a full frame camera. So to help summarise, I've drawn up this chart for you all to look at. As you can see, the Sigma lens has some huge advantages, but in terms of cost and size and sharpness top to down, the tiny little Canon f1.8 is very handy. The Canon 50mm f1.4 lens is a happy medium between the two in pretty much every way, and it happens to be the lens that I own. I'm very happy with it, although I do sometimes wish I owned the Sigma lens for its great picture quality. But before you make a decision yourself, take a look at my reviews on my YouTube channel for all three lenses for more detailed information that you might find useful.